Have you ever wondered how a small African nation could shake all of Europe with nothing more than a silent decision? Have you ever imagined that the smug laughter inside a glittering London boardroom could become the spark for a financial storm across the world? And would you believe that sometimes the greatest power doesn't come from weapons or thick stacks of contracts, but from a calm nod and the courage to say, enough? Today, we'll walk through a story that sounds almost fictional, yet carries deep truths about memory, dignity, and a continent long underestimated. In the next 30 minutes, you'll discover why gold, a metal many thought was outdated, still has the power to rattle the foundations of modern finance. How a young leader turned silence into his strongest weapon. And most importantly, the lesson of redefining your own value, not with numbers, but with truth. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you this. If you held in your hands a priceless asset that the entire world depends on, would you keep selling it cheap, or dare to hold it back and rewrite the rules? Let's begin this journey right now. Cold white lights poured down over the polished boardroom at the heart of Europe's financial district. Glass walls reflected expensive suits, glossy ties, and the confident faces of men who believed they held the keys to the world. Giant LED screens flickered with numbers, markets in constant motion, billions rising and falling every second. And then, into that space where a single decision could erase fortunes in an instant, a new figure appeared. A young man in a simple military uniform. No medals gleaming, no silk tie. His footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor, but enough to draw every gaze. It was Ibrahim Traoré. He brought no entourage, no thick binders, no flashy slideshow, only an idea, a proposal, to build a new credit system for Africa, backed by gold. The reaction was instant. Laughter broke out. A silver-haired banker smirked. Gold? In the 21st century? Do you really think we're going back to the Middle Ages? Another added, louder, This is the financial center of the world, sir. We're not some desert marketplace in the Sahara. Laughter echoed around the glass walls. Heads shook with ridicule. Eyes narrowed with pity. No one treated the idea as serious. To them, it was nothing more than a wild dream from a small, insignificant nation. But Traoré stayed silent. His gaze was steady, unwavering. The silence stretched, so long that unease began to ripple across the room. A junior analyst whispered to his colleague, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Then, quietly, Traoré reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rugged device, something like a military-grade encrypted phone. Without a word, he tapped a single command. Thousands of kilometers away, in the gold mines of Burkina Faso, the flow stopped. Trucks lined up in silence, engines cut. At airports, flights carrying gold were canceled, warehouses sealed. A supply chain that had run, uninterrupted for decades, suddenly vanished. And within hours, Mali, Niger, Guinea followed. Their gold too was locked away, as if every link of a vast chain had been pulled free at once. Back in the boardroom, the screens bled red. Gold prices spiked upward, graphs shooting vertical. Trading systems fired off alerts. A broker, pale-faced, stammered, "This can't be real. It's the entire Sahel region. They've just disappeared from the supply chain." The laughter was gone. The smirks had vanished. In their place, a heavy silence, thick and suffocating, like cracks spreading unseen through the glass tower itself. And at the center of that silence sat Traoré, calm, unshaken, saying nothing. His silence roared louder than any speech ever could. Thousands of miles away, the financial streets of Paris, Frankfurt, and Zurich, usually buzzing with quiet confidence, were thrown into chaos. Trading boards glowed red, gold prices soared by the minute, breaking every historical record. Futures contracts collapsed. Investors scrambled to dump assets in a desperate attempt to salvage what remained. On European news channels, anchors delivered updates in trembling voices. The gold market has frozen. The entire supply chain from the Sahel has been severed. The ECB is convening an emergency meeting tonight. In Frankfurt, a reporter stood outside the European Central Bank headquarters, wind whipping across his face, voice urgent. This is the most severe financial crisis since 2008. But this time, it hasn't come from banks. It's triggered by a political decision in Africa. Across the continent, near major banks, unprecedented scenes unfolded. Long lines of citizens rushing to withdraw cash, fearing systemic collapse. In Brussels, an elderly woman broke down in tears. They told us gold was just symbolic, and now all my savings are vanishing. Inside closed-door meetings, EU leaders clashed bitterly. France slammed the table, demanding immediate sanctions on Burkina Faso and its allies. Germany urged compromise, warning that its heavy industries were deeply tied to Sahel resources. Italy and Spain worried about the crisis spilling into their fragile banking systems. Meanwhile, Western media repeated a single phrase: the Sahel gold shock. Major headlines screamed, "Africa disappears from the global supply chain." The silence of a young general and the earthquake on Wall Street. In London, a weary financial analyst sighed into the camera. "We thought gold was nothing more than a luxury commodity. Turns out, it's still the hidden heart of global finance. And that heart has just been squeezed." Yet, while Europe's elite scrambled for answers, a very different scene was unfolding in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Crowds poured into the streets, singing, dancing. A group of young men hoisted a banner high. "Independence 2.0, this time economic." Social media exploded. The hashtag #HadAfricaGold went viral. From Lagos to Bamako, Dakar to Conakry, celebration photos flooded timelines. The pounding of djembe drums echoed, mixing with cheers as if the continent had just won a World Cup final. But beneath the jubilation, one fact stood undeniable. Traoré's silence had triggered a financial earthquake across the globe. And this was only the beginning. If in Europe, glowing red screens symbolized panic and collapse, then in Africa, the skies that same night lit up with fireworks and drums. In Ouagadougou, tens of thousands flooded the central square. From elderly men leaning on canes to children still in school uniforms, everyone pressed forward, eager to stand closer, to hear the loudspeakers blaring songs of freedom. People carried flags, hand-stitched cloths, and hastily painted signs reading, "We will no longer sell our gold cheaply." Music filled every corner. The pounding rhythm of djembe drums mixed with the gentle notes of the kora. Traditional dances fused with modern moves, turning the square into a rare festival of joy. A mother, cradling her baby, smiled through tears as she told a reporter, "Today, my child will grow up in a country that knows its own worth." And it wasn't just Burkina Faso. In Bamako, Mali, crowds gathered by the Niger River, lighting candles and sending them drifting across the water, like a ritual whispering, "We are awake." In Conakry, Guinea, motorbike caravans roared through the streets, flags snapping in the wind, horns blaring like a triumphant march. Social media exploded. Within hours, the hashtag #HadGoldOfAfrica soared to the top of global trends. Millions of short clips spread, miners grinning ear to ear, children holding up notebooks stamped with the word Kura, graffiti scrawled across walls reading, "We are the gold." In Lagos, Nigeria, a famous rapper dropped a freestyle, barely 2 minutes long, but by nightfall it had hundreds of thousands of shares. "We once sold our blood through gold, now we hold gold to keep our blood alive." The euphoria spread like wildfire. For perhaps the first time in decades, Africans across the continent shared one common emotion: pride. An African journalist wrote on his personal page, "We once celebrated political independence, but today we celebrate economic independence. This is the day when one man's silence became the shout of an entire continent." In cafes, people debated whether the coming Kura currency would truly change lives. In schools, teachers brought the event into lessons, reminding students that history is not only written in books, it is written by the actions of those who dare to live it. All of Africa seemed to be dreaming the same dream. But in this dream, there was no inferiority, no colonial shadow, only drums, cheers, and a whisper carried through millions of hearts. We are awake, and we will never go back to yesterday. The gold earthquake stunned the world, but few knew that everything had been carefully prepared long before. Months earlier, when gunfire still echoed across the Sahel desert, Traoré had walked into a dim, dust-covered archive room deep inside the national vaults. Old cabinets lined the walls, stuffed with colonial-era mining contracts. He opened folder after folder, eyes narrowing as he read. 80% of profits siphoned abroad, 15% buried under management fees, leaving only scraps for the country. An elderly advisor beside him whispered, "These are not contracts, they're death sentences for our economy." Traoré nodded quietly. From that day, he formed a secret group. Young lawyers versed in international law, fintech engineers, and a handful of loyal officers. They called it the Triangle: law, technology, military. In cramped rooms lit by yellow lamps, faces bent over their work. Lawyers marked entire pages in red, exposing exploitative clauses. Engineers built prototypes of a digital currency backed by gold. The military drafted plans to guard reserves, secure transport routes, and prepare for direct confrontation if it came. Everything was kept under absolute secrecy. Not a single line leaked. Even within government circles, only a few were aware. By day, they attended official meetings, shook hands, posed for photographs. By night, they returned to those hidden rooms, sketching the outline of a new future. A young engineer, freshly graduated from Ghana, once said in a late-night meeting, "If we fail, the world won't remember us, but if we succeed, Africa will rewrite the rules of the global game." Traoré smiled faintly and replied, "The world doesn't need to remember our names. What matters is that the next generation will know there were people who dared to stand." Brick by brick, piece by piece, the foundation was laid. Beyond those walls, no one knew that one day these quiet bricks would form a fortress strong enough to make Europe tremble. The financial earthquake the world witnessed today wasn't born in an instant. It was the outcome of hundreds of sleepless nights, thousands of torn pages, and countless failed experiments, all hidden behind a curtain of silence. Silence, but silence that was preparing for thunder. As the gold shock rippled across the globe, many began asking, why would such small nations dare to do something so unprecedented? The answer wasn't born in the present, it was buried in the dusty archives Traoré and his team had unearthed. Colonial-era contracts stared back like scars carved into memory. They weren't just numbers on paper, they were raw injustice. A multinational granted rights to a mine for 99 years, profits split 85-10-5, with the meager 5 reserved for the people. Thousands of miners laboring in brutal conditions, while documents described them as voluntary workers. One contract even stated, "All disputes shall be resolved in the courts of Paris." In other words, even if Sahel's people were exploited, they had no right to seek justice on their own soil. A young lawyer on the team burst out, "These aren't contracts, they're blueprints for an invisible prison." They uncovered a web of shell companies, created solely to funnel money. On the surface, they looked like international mining firms. In reality, they were conduits, pipes that siphoned Africa's gold into Europe, then wired the profits through Switzerland, London, or Caribbean tax havens. It was looting, dressed up as legality, theft, wrapped in stamps, signatures, and reams of paper. In one late-night meeting, Traoré stood before the files, voice heavy. "We've spent decades inside a theater of lies. On the surface, they played the role of partners, but on the script, we were nothing but extras. It's time to tear up that script." Gradually, scanned copies of these contracts began to appear in African media. For the first time, people saw the signatures of colonial officials, the seals of European banks, the cold numbers showing how cheaply their ancestors had been sold out. The reaction was electric. In Bamako, thousands of students staged a public reading, reciting each unjust clause aloud as if holding a trial in the streets. In Niamey, street artists painted murals, a giant European hand clawing gold from the earth, while the people received only crumbs. Slowly, the truth left the archives and entered collective memory. It was no longer hidden on faded paper. It was alive in the voices and hearts of the people. And that memory became the fuel for today's economic resistance. An African scholar put it simply, "Europe has its banks, Asia has its factories, America has its media, but Africa has memory, and memory never loses its value." While the world was still arguing over the gold shock, in Ouagadougou, a team of young engineers were finishing the final lines of code for a project they called Kura, a digital currency fully backed by gold. Unlike Bitcoin, which rests only on faith in algorithmic scarcity, Kura was anchored to the very metal that had shaken human history for centuries. Every unit of Kura issued carried a unique identifier tied to a specific amount of real gold, stored safely in reserves. Every transaction was recorded on blockchain, public, transparent, untouchable. No single nation could manipulate it. One engineer explained, "Central banks can print more money, but they can't print more gold. That's what makes Kura a direct challenge to the old system." On the day Kura was unveiled, millions watched live. On a giant screen in the square, the image of a gleaming gold bar shimmered, then slowly dissolved into the Kura logo, a digital coin but anchored to something real. International experts were skeptical at first. They dismissed it as a romantic experiment, doomed to collapse quickly. But within weeks, Kura proved them wrong. Citizens in Burkina Faso began using Kura in daily life, buying coffee, paying for bus rides, sending money back to their families. As trust spread, African diasporas in France, the US, and Canada began remitting funds home in Kura instead of dollars or euros. A chain reaction followed. Neighboring nations, Mali, Niger, Guinea, also adopted Kura as a parallel means of exchange. Within months, Kura became Africa's first cross-border digital currency, transcending political frontiers. Western media could no longer ignore it. The Economist called Kura a Bitcoin with real gold behind it. The Financial Times wrote, "If successful, Kura could pose a greater challenge than the gold shock itself." In Lagos, a tech entrepreneur remarked, "Europe has the euro, America has the dollar, China has the renminbi. For the first time, Africa has a currency that doesn't rely on anyone else. It relies on its own assets." The birth of Kura was more than a technological step. It was a declaration. We can build a financial system of our own, without asking anyone's permission. From the bricks laid in silence to the old contracts exposed, Kura now stood as the cornerstone of a new order. And once trust had been planted, it spread faster than any fire. If Kura was the first step in reclaiming financial control, then AFJax, the African Gold Exchange, was the second strike, direct and open against the old system. The idea was simple. Why should London or Zurich dictate the price of gold when Africa, producing over 40% of the world's supply, could set the price at the source? AFJax was established in Ouagadougou, inside a modern glass-walled building that reflected the blazing Sahel sun. Inside, hundreds of screens displayed trades in real time, but what set it apart wasn't just technology, it was its principle of absolute transparency. Every lot of gold listed on AFJax carried a traceable code, verified through blockchain. Buyers from anywhere, New York, Tokyo, Johannesburg, could check which mine it came from, how much it weighed, and exactly how it was priced. No more hidden fees, no more vague transportation costs used to drive prices down. A Kenyan trader said on opening day, "For the first time, we are no longer selling gold like contraband. We are selling it as an asset with dignity." The impact was immediate. Exchanges in London and Switzerland began to wobble. Long-term contracts were challenged, as AFJax's reference prices came in higher than the artificially imposed Western benchmarks. Even more surprising, within months, several European companies themselves applied to join AFJax. Because if they refused, they risked losing access to a stable supply. On European television, an expert admitted, "We once believed gold could only be priced in the world's financial capitals. Now, the lands that produce it are rewriting the rules." AFJax was not just a new marketplace for gold. It was a declaration. Whoever holds the resources holds the right to set the price. And with AFJax, for the first time, Africa spoke on the global stage, not as the silent supplier, but as the rulemaker. Morning in Pama. Sunlight spills across the red earth where a simple white tarp has been stretched. No red carpet, no orchestra, only children laughing and dusty hands clapping. Traoré takes up a trowel and lays the first brick of the Sahel University of Economic Justice. He leans toward the children in the front row and says softly, "From now on, every contract must be read aloud before it's signed, and the ones reading will be you." In makeshift classrooms under acacia trees, The first lessons don't begin with GDP definitions. They begin with an old contract, clauses, stamps, signatures, and the question, where is the injustice? Where can we fix it? Every student must learn 2 local languages and 1 international legal language, so that disputes are never again shipped overseas. In Ouagadougou, the Museum of Economic Memory opens. At its center, a torn mining contract, framed in glass. Beside it, a touchscreen shows the data trail. Mine of origin, date extracted, tonnage hauled away. Numbers once buried, now displayed as public lessons. A new rule is passed. All resource contracts must be broadcast before approval. On TV, you see a high school teacher explaining the profit-sharing clause to a village. A freshman questioning a company rep about that mysterious 15% management fee. A young mother standing up to say, if this profit can't fund a health clinic, we don't agree. At the bottom corner of the broadcast, the tiny watermark, transparency is the front line. A digital platform is launched, the Public Works Ledger. Every mile of road, every well, every school roof has a QR code. Scan it, and you see instantly the budget source, the spending, the progress, the names responsible. For the first time, collective memory isn't oral. It has an address, a timestamp, a view count, even community comments. At a newly reformed gold mine, wages rise, hours shorten, safety gear is replaced. A miner's daughter, Ayana, wins a scholarship to the new university. At night, she replays a broadcast of a water project's contract review, tapping the screen to highlight a shady clause. She leaves a comment, I want to study resource law, so small print can never trick us again. Memory leaves the shadows. It enters textbooks as assignments. Find 3 unjust clauses in this contract. It becomes a street song. Memory isn't for mourning, memory is for signing. It becomes a village festival, contract reading day. Each year, agreements are read aloud like poems, but with the power to defend the future. Critics say, you're politicizing education. Traoré answers calmly, only thieves call memory dangerous. For memory here is not about hatred. It is the moral infrastructure that prevents injustice from returning. Like roads, like electricity, memory too is public infrastructure. And at the heart of it all lies something simple. People begin to believe they deserve more. Not because of a speech, but because of a transparent line of data. Not because of promises, but because of a contract read out loud. Memory now is poured like concrete as the foundation of a house that will stand. Let us return to that glass-walled room in Europe where it all began. The laughter is gone. On the screens, it's no longer just plunging charts. It's also ticker lines reading, memory becomes infrastructure. Gold priced at the source. Kura reaches new users. And suddenly, the financiers realize what terrifies them is not the gold. It's that the people holding gold have learned to read contracts. In Africa, night falls more slowly now, because new lights stay on, at clinics, in classrooms, in roadside workshops. On a cafe wall, someone has chalked, we are not rich because someone gave, we are enough because we learned to keep. An old man studies the words, nodding. It's been a long time since a sentence fit our hearts like that. Gold, in the end, is not just metal. It is dignity, recast from memory. Silence, in the end, is not absence. It is how the world is forced to listen, and enough, in the end, is not refusal. It is the beginning of a new game. And you, the one watching this, if one day you discover you hold something of value that the world needs, will you let others set your price? Or will you set your own? Will you keep signing contracts you haven't read, or will you read them aloud so your community can hear? If this story resonates with you, leave a comment. What part of it made you believe a new era can start from a silent decision? And if you could choose one contract in your life to read out loud for everyone to hear, which one would it be? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters, where we'll continue exposing the invisible contracts shaping our lives every day. Because, after all, the future is not something handed down. It is something signed. with memory and dignity. And today, we've signed a new page.